Among history's most remarkable figures, two women stand whose strength and legacy still echo across centuries: Maria Carolina of Austria and Marie Louise, Duchess of Parma. Each carved her legacy across continents, navigating politics, tragedy, and power in a world ruled by men. Let us begin with the first, Maria Carolina of Austria. Maria Carolina of Austria was born on the 13th of August in the year 1752 at Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna, in the Archduchy of Austria. How did this daughter of a powerful empress rise to command kingdoms, defy empires, and outlive her enemies? What shaped her into one of the boldest queens of southern Europe, feared by her foes and admired by her allies? Was it her family legacy, her sharp mind, or the fires of revolution that forged her destiny? Please watch my full video until the end, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please make sure to share it with your friends. Thank you. Now, let us dive into the full story. Born into the glittering yet politically burdened court of Maria Theresa and Francis I, Maria Carolina was the 13th child in a dynasty of empresses, archduchesses, and kings. Nicknamed Charlotte by her family, she was raised alongside her beloved younger sister Maria Antonia, later known as Marie Antoinette. Their bond was deep and mischievous, prompting their mother to separate them as teenagers. The death of two elder sisters from smallpox left young Maria Carolina chosen for a strategic marriage to King Ferdinand of Naples, a role she at first resisted but ultimately transformed into one of the most politically powerful queens of her era. In the turbulent autumn of 1767, Maria Carolina's life took a sharp turn. Her sister Maria Josepha, originally destined to marry King Ferdinand of Naples, tragically died of smallpox just before her departure. Only a few years earlier, another sister, Maria Johanna, had met the same fate. These painful losses threatened the fragile Austro-Spanish alliance. To preserve it, Empress Maria Theresa offered another daughter, and Maria Carolina was chosen. Heartbroken and frightened, she pleaded to avoid what she called an unlucky marriage. But her protests were silenced by duty. At just 15 years old, Maria Carolina was married to Ferdinand by proxy on the 7th of April in the year 1768. Her brother stood in for the groom during the solemn ceremony in Vienna. From that moment, her journey to Naples was not just physical. It marked the beginning of a lifelong transformation. Her path southward was grand and ceremonial. She traveled through Mantua, Bologna, Florence, and Rome, escorted with full royal honors. On the 12th of May, she entered Naples through Terracina, where she tearfully parted ways with her Austrian attendants. Upon meeting her new husband, her disappointment was immediate. Ferdinand, blunt and coarse, did little to charm her. She wrote to her former governess, saying she loved him only out of duty. Despite the cold beginning, she would not only fulfill her role as queen, she would redefine it, wielding power with unexpected skill and determination. Maria Carolina's early years as Queen of Naples were marked by emotional isolation and cultural shock. Her new court was less refined than Vienna, and her husband Ferdinand, uneducated and uninterested in governance, left much of the state's management in the hands of his father's advisor, Bernardo Tanucci. Maria Carolina quickly realized that real influence required subtlety, patience, and strategy. Despite her strained marriage, she committed herself to royal duty. Between 1772 and 1793, she bore 18 children, 7 of whom survived to adulthood. Her first son, Carlo, died in infancy, but the birth of a healthy male heir in 1775 proved to be a turning point. According to the marriage agreement, this granted Maria Carolina a seat on the Privy Council, the inner circle of governance. It was an opportunity she had long anticipated. To reach that point, she used clever tactics. She feigned interest in her husband's favorite pastime, hunting, to win his trust. With this bond secured, she began navigating the court's complex politics. Behind closed doors, she reawakened the social and intellectual life of the Neapolitan court, reviving cultural salons and supporting Enlightenment thinkers. Still, her position was not yet secure. Tanucci's dominance in government remained strong, and she was constantly under observation. Yet Maria Carolina, trained by her mother in diplomacy and patience, steadily prepared for the moment when she could step into true power, a moment that was fast approaching. The birth of a male heir in 1775 was more than a dynastic triumph. It was Maria Carolina's gateway to real power. By agreement, her new status as mother to the future king allowed her formal entry into the Privy Council. This marked the beginning of a dramatic shift in Naples' political life. For the first time, the Queen was no longer a background figure. She was now a voice in decision-making and soon the dominant one. Maria Carolina wasted no time. She immediately began to challenge the influence of Bernardo Tanucci, who had served as de facto ruler under both Ferdinand and his father. Tanucci represented Spanish interests and sought to keep Maria Carolina sidelined. But the Queen was not easily intimidated. Following Empress Maria Theresa's instructions, she continued to strengthen her relationship with Ferdinand, creating the appearance of unity while quietly gathering allies. Her rise was marked by intellect and maneuvering. She built a network of courtiers, nobles, and Enlightenment scholars, and brought fresh energy to the stagnant court. She revived Naples' cultural identity and used public perception to her advantage, cultivating the image of a thoughtful, engaged queen in contrast to her indifferent husband. Privately, she grew impatient with Tanucci's obstruction. The opportunity to remove him would come soon, and Maria Carolina was ready. With each passing council meeting, she learned the rhythms of power, biding her time and building confidence. Naples had underestimated her, but not for much longer. By 1776, Maria Carolina had positioned herself as a formidable political force. Her growing influence threatened the aging minister Bernardo Tanucci, whose authority was rooted in Spanish dominance and resistance to reform. Their clash was inevitable, and it began over the Queen's unexpected support for Freemasonry. Tanucci, under orders from the Spanish crown, revived an old law banning the practice. But Maria Carolina, believing in Enlightenment ideals, saw this as a personal affront and a political opportunity. With calculated precision, she crafted a letter for her husband to sign, making it appear that Ferdinand himself disagreed with Tanucci's actions. The result was swift and dramatic. Tanucci was dismissed in October 1776. It was a public victory, but also a personal one. For the first time, Maria Carolina had removed a major figure from government and proved she could outmaneuver even the most established statesmen. In Tanucci's place, she promoted men loyal to her cause. Chief among them was Sir John Acton, a British-born military strategist who would become her closest advisor. Acton shared her vision for modernizing the navy, expanding trade, and breaking Spanish influence. With her support, he rose quickly through the ranks, eventually becoming Minister of War and of Marine. Together, Maria Carolina and Acton set the stage for a new era in Naples. But their alliance, though strategic, stirred gossip and jealousy. Many at court whispered about the closeness of their relationship. The Queen dismissed such talk. She had plans to remake a kingdom, and with Acton beside her, nothing would stand in her way. With Tanucci gone and Sir John Acton at her side, Maria Carolina ruled Naples with more authority than any queen before her. From 1778 onward, her leadership reshaped the kingdom. She sought to modernize not only the state's bureaucracy, but also its military strength, especially the neglected navy. Guided by her brother, Emperor Joseph II, and Acton's strategic mind, she launched bold reforms that startled the old nobility. Under their direction, 4 new marine colleges were opened, and over 150 ships were commissioned. The merchant fleet expanded through new trade agreements with Russia and Genoa. Maria Carolina's goal was not just economic. She aimed to secure Naples against the rising threats in Europe. These reforms were practical, but they also sent a clear message: Naples would no longer bow to foreign dominance. Acton's presence, however, was controversial. His English origins upset the Spanish court, which had long treated Naples as a satellite. When Charles III of Spain complained about his appointment, Maria Carolina defended Acton through letters penned in the king's name, a political maneuver that cleverly masked her growing control. Behind palace walls, the queen's command of government widened. She cut military expenses while improving efficiency, invited foreign officers to train her troops, and watched as Acton became field marshal. Rumors swirled about their closeness, but Maria Carolina stayed focused. In her mind, gossip was a price worth paying for progress, and Naples was finally becoming the state she envisioned. While asserting her authority in politics, Maria Carolina also shaped Naples into a vibrant cultural hub. Like her mother before her, she believed that art, music, and education were tools of prestige and influence. She welcomed artists, musicians, and philosophers into her court, blending Enlightenment ideals with the grandeur of Bourbon tradition. Among her most notable proteges was the Swiss-born painter Angelica Kauffmann, who captured royal life with elegance and intimacy. Kauffmann painted the Neapolitan royal family in a relaxed garden setting, a striking departure from stiff court portraits. Maria Carolina also supported the landscape artist Jacob Philipp Hackert, granting him residence at Francavilla Palace. He gave art lessons to her children and even advised the court on art restoration, leading to the return of ancient statues from the Palazzo Farnese to Naples. Her influence extended to intellectuals. She patronized thinkers like Gaetano Filangieri and Giuseppe Maria Galanti, who had once inspired her with their progressive ideas. At the same time, she cleverly used cultural diplomacy to reinforce ties with powerful European courts, especially Vienna and the Papal States. Perhaps her most innovative act was the creation of the San Lucio colony in 1784. Designed as a model village for silk weavers, it had its own laws and schools, a social experiment blending Enlightenment theory with royal control. Through art, education, and diplomacy, Maria Carolina sought to elevate Naples to match the great courts of Europe. For a moment, it seemed she was succeeding. The outbreak of the French Revolution in 1789 shook the thrones of Europe, but for Maria Carolina, it struck at her heart. Her youngest and dearest sister, Maria Antonia, now Queen Marie Antoinette of France, was at the center of the storm. From Naples, Maria Carolina watched the chaos unfold with mounting fear and anguish. As rumors and letters filtered through diplomatic channels, she learned of the increasing hostility toward the French monarchy. When the royal family was attacked at the Tuileries Palace in August 1792, Maria Carolina nearly severed all diplomatic ties with France. Her grief and fury deepened when Marie Antoinette was imprisoned, and even further when she was executed in October 1793. From that day forward, Maria Carolina refused to speak French, calling it that monstrous language. Her response was swift and severe. She abandoned her former support of Enlightenment ideas and transformed Naples into a tightly controlled police state. The kingdom was divided into 12 administrative wards, each overseen by loyal commissioners. A secret police network was established to monitor dissent. Spies infiltrated every level of society, creating an atmosphere of fear and control. Her sorrow turned to vengeance. She strengthened her alliance with Britain and began courting the support of Emma Hamilton, wife of the British ambassador. Together, they plotted counter-revolutionary strategies. Maria Carolina's personal grief became political fuel, and she would stop at nothing to ensure that what happened in France would never be repeated in Naples. As the French Revolution spread across Europe, Maria Carolina braced Naples for its inevitable impact. Determined to keep revolutionary ideals from taking root, she transformed her kingdom into a fortress of surveillance and control. By the mid-1790s, Naples was divided into 12 police wards, each managed by commissioners loyal to the crown. A vast, secret police force operated beneath the surface, enlisting spies from every social class, merchants, servants, and even clergy. But repression alone could not guarantee safety. Maria Carolina sought powerful allies. Her attention turned to Britain, whose navy protected Mediterranean trade routes. Though hesitant at first, she welcomed the British ambassador's wife, Emma Hamilton, into her inner circle. Their unlikely friendship flourished, and Emma soon became a key player in diplomatic affairs, charming the court and passing valuable intelligence between Naples and London. Maria Carolina's circle tightened around figures she could trust. Chief among them was Sir John Acton, who had by now risen to the role of Prime Minister. Together, they drafted treaties and military strategies to defend the kingdom. But tensions with revolutionary France escalated. After the French ambassador's demands were ignored and British support wavered, Naples found itself dangerously exposed. Maria Carolina's network of alliances, while bold, could not stop the tide forever. Revolutionary pamphlets began to circulate, dissent festered underground, and the Queen's popularity plummeted. What began as a strategy of containment now risked becoming a spark. The revolution was no longer a distant threat. It was knocking at her door. By the closing years of the 1790s, Maria Carolina's worst fears were realized. With Napoleon's campaigns sweeping across Italy, the fragile web of alliances she had woven began to tear. Though she had secured a defensive pact with Austria in May 1798, France's seizure of the Papal States forced her hand. After Britain's naval victory at the Battle of the Nile, she joined the Second Coalition and committed Naples to war against France. In a grand war council at the Palace of Caserta, Maria Carolina, King Ferdinand, General Mack, Admiral Nelson, and diplomat William Hamilton planned an invasion of the Roman Republic, a puppet state under French control. But their strategy failed spectacularly. In early January 1799, French General Championnet stormed Naples. The royal family fled to Sicily aboard British ships, leaving their capital in chaos. Just weeks later, on the 24th of January, the French declared the creation of the Parthenopean Republic. It was named after the ancient Greek city of Parthenope, but its mission was thoroughly modern, to replace monarchy with liberty, equality, and fraternity. Led by Neapolitan revolutionaries and supported by French troops, the Republic quickly abolished Bourbon rule. Maria Carolina, exiled in Palermo, refused to accept defeat. She coordinated with British forces and secretly funded resistance. Meanwhile, royalist forces known as the Sanfedisti, led by Cardinal Ruffo, began a brutal counter-offensive. With support from Nelson's fleet, they recaptured Naples by June. The Parthenopean Republic collapsed within 6 months, but the Queen's triumph came at a heavy cost. Exiled in Sicily after the French invasion, Maria Carolina refused to remain idle. Though stripped of her throne, she intensified her efforts to reclaim Naples through secret correspondence, diplomacy, and military coordination. With the help of Admiral Nelson, William and Emma Hamilton, and Royalist commander Cardinal Fabrizio Ruffo, she laid the groundwork for a swift counterattack against the Parthenopean Republic. The Sanfedisti, a royalist militia of peasants, clergy, and loyalists, marched under Ruffo's command through southern Italy. Their campaign was brutal and filled with vengeance, but it gained ground rapidly. By June 1799, they reached Naples. With French troops weakened and local support waning, the Republic collapsed. Maria Carolina's forces, supported by British naval power, had triumphed. Bourbon rule was restored, and the Queen once again held influence over her kingdom. However, the restoration was far from peaceful. Reprisals against Republicans were severe, and Maria Carolina approved executions and exiles of those seen as traitors. She considered it justice, others saw it as ruthless vengeance. Her alliance with Nelson, once admired, now drew criticism across Europe. Even as she returned to power, her kingdom remained unstable. French forces still loomed in the north, and Napoleon's shadow grew darker by the day. Maria Carolina had reclaimed her throne, but her enemies were far from defeated. Her next challenge would test not only her political skill, but her endurance in a world changing faster than any monarch could control. The early 1800s brought new complications for Maria Carolina, not just from foreign enemies, but from within her own family. Though she had successfully restored her throne, the political map of Europe was shifting. Napoleon Bonaparte's rise was unstoppable, and the Queen knew that old alliances would no longer be enough. She turned her attention to dynastic strategy, marrying her children into powerful houses to secure influence across Europe. During her stay in Vienna between 1800 and 1802, she arranged two critical marriages. Her daughter Maria Theresa wed Crown Prince Francis of Austria, while another daughter, Louise, married Ferdinand, Grand Duke of Tuscany. These unions strengthened ties with the Habsburgs and reinforced her connection to the imperial center of power. Yet ironically, her favorite granddaughter, Marie-Louise, would later become Empress of France by marrying her arch-enemy, Napoleon. Back in Naples, tensions brewed. Though Napoleon respected Maria Carolina's political willpower, he sought to dominate Italy. After Austria's defeat at Austerlitz in 1805, the French emperor moved to seize Naples. He installed his brother Joseph Bonaparte on the throne, forcing Maria Carolina and her family into exile once again, this time permanently. As the crown slipped from her grasp, Maria Carolina realized that her legacy would not be one of permanent power, but of fierce resistance. Her vision for Naples had not failed. It had been overtaken by a newer, more ruthless world order that no longer respected monarchs or mothers. Forced into permanent exile in Sicily after Napoleon's conquest of Naples, Maria Carolina found herself increasingly sidelined. Though still queen in title, her influence waned with every passing year. Britain, once her staunch ally, began to view her as a liability rather than a partner, especially after the death of Admiral Nelson, her strongest supporter, in the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. Her relationship with her husband, King Ferdinand, also fractured. In 1813, under pressure from British diplomats and Sicilian reformers, Ferdinand effectively abdicated power and appointed their son, Francis, as regent. Maria Carolina was excluded from the new political order. The Queen, who had once controlled ministers, armies, and alliances, now had no say in her own kingdom's affairs. Bitter and restless, she attempted to assert herself, but found no audience. Her once loyal supporters were either dead, disgraced, or aligned with newer powers. Even her alliance with Emma Hamilton had become a source of embarrassment in diplomatic circles. With the courts of Europe focused on defeating Napoleon, Maria Carolina's voice faded into irrelevance. In early 1814, she departed Sicily for the last time, hoping to rebuild her influence in Vienna. The journey was long and tiring, a slow procession through Constantinople, Odessa, and Budapest. Though her body was weakening, her spirit had not yet surrendered. She believed restoration was still possible, and clung to hope that her family's rule over Naples could be revived. In January of 1814, Maria Carolina arrived in Vienna after a grueling journey through war-torn Europe. Once a commanding queen of Naples and Sicily, she returned to her birthplace as a diminished figure, aged, weary, and politically outcast. Her final hope was to influence the Congress of Vienna and secure the restoration of her family's rule. But the world had changed, and so had the court she once knew. Emperor Francis of Austria, her nephew, received her with polite respect but little enthusiasm. Prince Metternich, the new architect of European diplomacy, had little patience for her outdated style of monarchy. She submitted petitions, wrote letters, and pleaded with allies, but her words no longer carried weight. For the first time in her life, Maria Carolina had no power left to wield. Her health declined rapidly. Alone in her chambers at Hetzendorf Palace, she surrounded herself with memories, portraits, letters, and news from Naples. One of her only comforts was the presence of her favorite grandchild, Marie Louise, now Empress of the French and wife to the very man who had unseated her, Napoleon Bonaparte. On the 8th of September in the year 1814, Maria Carolina died from a stroke. Her maid found her collapsed on the floor, surrounded by scattered letters, a queen's final attempt to hold onto a world already lost. She was buried in the imperial crypt of Vienna, the last surviving child of Empress Maria Theresa. Maria Carolina of Austria left behind a legacy both complex and often overshadowed. Once one of the most powerful women in Europe, she was a queen who ruled not in name alone, but with the authority and vision of a monarch in her own right. She navigated alliances, crushed revolutions, reformed navies, and turned Naples into a cultural and diplomatic force, all while raising 18 children and battling the rising tide of French imperialism. Yet history has not been kind. Overshadowed by her more famous sister, Marie Antoinette, and eclipsed by the storm of Napoleon's conquests, Maria Carolina faded into the margins of European memory. Critics accused her of tyranny, vengeance, and meddling. Admirers praised her intellect, resilience, and devotion to family and duty. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. She was the last queen of an independent Naples and Sicily before they were merged into the kingdom of the two Sicilies. Her policies and patronage left lasting marks on education, the arts, and military institutions. San Lucio, her idealistic silk colony, remained a rare Enlightenment experiment in the South. Though she died far from the throne she once commanded, Maria Carolina's story endures. It is a story of a woman who refused to be silent even as empires collapsed around her. And in that defiance, her voice, though faint, still echoes across the pages of history. Let us now turn to another remarkable figure of royal descent. Marie Louise, Duchess of Parma, was born on the 12th of December in the year 1791 in Vienna, Austria, at the heart of the Habsburg Empire. What happens when a princess born to rule is forced to marry the very man who crushed her homeland? How does a daughter of Austria become Empress of France? and then a forgotten duchess in a distant land. And what did Marie-Louise truly feel as she stood at the crossroads of history, caught between love, duty, and survival? From the very beginning, Marie-Louise was raised under the weight of dynastic expectations. As the eldest child of Emperor Francis II of Austria and Maria Theresa of Naples and Sicily, her birth was hailed as a continuation of imperial strength. She was a child of treaties, alliances, and empire, destined to serve the Habsburg cause from cradle to crown. Educated in multiple languages, history, and courtly etiquette, Marie-Louise grew up in the opulent yet anxious world of post-revolutionary Europe. Her father, who had seen his own Aunt Marie Antoinette executed by the French, taught her to view France and Napoleon with caution and disdain. She inherited not just titles and jewels, but a deeply ingrained distrust of revolution and ambition. Yet fate would soon twist those lessons into a personal trial. As the map of Europe redrew itself in blood and battles, Marie-Louise's life would be rewritten not by her hand, but by the forces of empire. Marie-Louise spent her early years within the richly ornamented halls of the Hofburg Palace in Vienna, surrounded by grandeur yet governed by strict formality. The Austrian court, steeped in centuries of Habsburg tradition, offered little space for childhood wonder. As the eldest daughter of Emperor Francis II, Marie-Louise's every gesture was measured, every lesson aimed at shaping a future consort or ruler. Her upbringing was overseen by Empress Maria Theresa, her mother, whose Neapolitan warmth occasionally softened the court's stiffness. Yet discipline was paramount. Marie-Louise's education began early. She studied languages, music, geography, and dynastic history. French, Italian, and Latin flowed from her tongue with ease. Tutors reported her as obedient and diligent, though somewhat withdrawn. She also witnessed the instability of the world outside her palace walls. Revolutionary France had shaken Europe's monarchies, and Vienna became a fortress of anti-revolutionary conservatism. Her family spoke often of the fall of her great-aunt, Marie Antoinette, who had once ruled France and died on the guillotine. These stories, whispered yet vivid, planted seeds of fear and caution in her young heart. Despite her sheltered surroundings, Marie-Louise developed a gentle, reflective temperament. She showed a love for music and poetry and often wrote in her journal, documenting thoughts she dared not say aloud. These early years would prepare her for a life of ceremonial roles and political sacrifices, a life where she would have to smile outwardly, even when her heart longed for something far simpler. As Marie-Louise grew into adolescence, the lessons of royalty became more demanding. Her early education, once filled with music and literature, now turned toward politics, genealogy, and court diplomacy. She was reminded daily that she was not just a daughter, she was a symbol of the Habsburg legacy. Every move she made reflected on the dynasty. Her father, Emperor Francis II, stressed obedience and caution. Having suffered defeats at Napoleon's hands, he was determined to raise children who would serve the empire's survival. Marie-Louise's tutors trained her to be composed, discreet, and emotionally restrained, virtues admired in royal courts. She also studied the lives of past empresses, learning from their poise and diplomacy, but also their sacrifices. This period of her life saw a growing tension between her personal inclinations and the role imposed upon her. She enjoyed painting, poetry, and long walks in the palace gardens, yet time for these pleasures dwindled as she was prepared for marriage, the likely fate of all imperial daughters. Suitors were discussed as strategies, not romances. Love was a distant luxury. Though still a teenager, Marie-Louise began to understand that her life would not be her own. Her destiny would be forged not by choice, but by treaties and thrones. As Napoleon's power expanded across Europe, the Habsburg court knew that one of their own might be required to marry the very man they had called a tyrant. By the early 1800s, Napoleon Bonaparte had become the dominant force in European politics. After crowning himself Emperor of the French in 1804, he launched campaign after campaign that redrew the continent's borders. Austria, long a rival of France, found itself humiliated after repeated military defeats, particularly at Austerlitz in 1805 and Wagram in 1809. Emperor Francis II faced an impossible dilemma. The empire's treasury was depleted, its armies weakened, and morale shattered. While Austria remained proud and defiant in principle, pragmatism dictated a new approach, one that could secure peace, at least temporarily. That approach, to the shock of many courtiers, involved proposing a marriage between Napoleon and a Habsburg archduchess. Francis initially hesitated. His memories of Marie Antoinette's tragic fate in France haunted him. Yet Napoleon's growing power left few alternatives. When Napoleon's first wife, Josephine, failed to produce an heir and the marriage was annulled, a new opportunity and a new threat emerged. The French emperor requested Marie-Louise's hand. She was only 18. The court was stunned, but the pressure was immense. Refusing could mean renewed war. Accepting might preserve the fragile peace. In the end, state survival won over sentiment. Marie-Louise, raised to obey and protect her dynasty, was not consulted. She wept in private but complied in public. Austria, proud yet desperate, would send its daughter to the heart of the empire it once called an enemy. The wedding of Marie-Louise and Napoleon Bonaparte was one of the most politically charged unions in European history. On the surface, it was a grand gesture of reconciliation, a royal alliance meant to symbolize peace between Austria and France. But beneath the pageantry lay anxiety, resistance, and sacrifice. For Austria, it was not merely a matrimonial match, but a strategic necessity to preserve influence in a continent dominated by Napoleon's military might. The marriage contract was signed in February of 1810, and the proxy ceremony took place in Vienna. Napoleon was represented by Archduke Charles, one of his former military adversaries. In the Austrian court, the mood was somber. Many viewed the match as humiliating. Marie-Louise's father, Emperor Francis, reportedly wept privately at the thought of giving his daughter to the man who had once shattered Austria's armies. Yet diplomacy demanded obedience. When Marie-Louise departed for France, she left behind her family, homeland, and identity. She wrote in her diary that she felt like a sacrifice to reason of state. Her journey to France was ceremonial but emotionally hollow. Even the pomp of travel, gold carriages, royal escorts, cheering crowds, could not hide her apprehension. She crossed the border at Braunau, where all her Austrian belongings were taken away and replaced with French gowns and jewels. It was a symbolic shedding of her former self. She met Napoleon for the first time in Compiègne in March. He was 21 years her senior, a battle-hardened emperor who had once scorned her family. Marie-Louise, trained in diplomacy, greeted him with dignity. He, in turn, seemed captivated by her youth and calm poise. Some say he was surprised by her composure, noting that she did not tremble as previous brides had. Their official wedding was held in Paris on April 2nd, with enormous celebration across the empire. Though treated with grandeur, Marie-Louise knew her role to legitimize Napoleon's empire and produce an heir. France welcomed her as a symbol of stability and renewal. She became Empress of the French, stepping into the same position once held by her great-aunt Marie Antoinette, but under far different circumstances. Unlike Marie Antoinette, She arrived not as a foreign queen isolated by ignorance, but as a carefully prepared archduchess, aware of her duties and the stakes involved. What began as a peace offering soon became a fragile partnership, one shaped by power, ambition, and the ever-shifting tides of war. As Marie-Louise stepped into her role as Empress of the French, she faced a court that had once adored Josephine and now eyed her with suspicion. She was foreign, young, and Austrian, three things that drew quiet judgment from many nobles. Yet she surprised them with her calm presence, refined manners, and careful diplomacy. The Tuileries Palace became her new world. Marie-Louise adapted quickly to the expectations of the imperial court. She followed strict etiquette, learned French court customs, and played the role of devoted wife with practiced ease. Napoleon, pleased by her gentleness and obedience, often praised her modesty and dignity. Unlike Josephine, Marie-Louise did not involve herself in court intrigue or public affairs, a choice that protected her reputation but distanced her from the political pulse. In public, she was serene and graceful. She appeared at ceremonies, opened balls, and fulfilled the symbolic role of mother to the empire. Behind closed doors, however, she remained cautious. She wrote letters home in which she described her new life as lonely but manageable. She had been taught that queens endure, not resist. The people of France gradually accepted her. Her Austrian heritage faded from immediate concern, especially as hopes rose for an heir. Marie-Louise understood her position clearly. Her value lay in her ability to secure the future of the Bonaparte dynasty, a future that would soon rest in her womb. Though her marriage to Napoleon appeared calm on the surface, Marie-Louise experienced growing emotional isolation. The emperor, though initially attentive, was often away on military campaigns. His focus remained on war, diplomacy, and the expansion of his empire. Left behind in the palaces of Paris or St. Cloud, Marie-Louise spent her days surrounded by courtiers she barely trusted, and in a country she still didn't fully call her own. Her letters to family in Vienna reflected this quiet disconnection. She missed her siblings, her native tongue, and the intimacy of her former life. Despite being empress, she had little influence over policy or decision-making. She followed Napoleon's commands and maintained appearances, but the loneliness of her station deepened with time. Yet she began to change. Marie-Louise gradually adopted French as her primary language. She immersed herself in Parisian society, took up new fashions, and even embraced some aspects of French culture. She became more comfortable with her new identity, though never fully rooted in it. Her old self, the Habsburg daughter, slowly faded behind layers of duty and survival. At court, her transformation was praised. She was now seen as more French than Austrian, more empress than archduchess. But within her private diaries and reflections, Marie-Louise remained uncertain, a royal figure reshaped by the crown she wore, and the empire she had never chosen to call home. On the 20th of March in the year 1811, Marie-Louise gave birth to a son, Napoleon Francois Charles Joseph, the long-awaited heir to the French Empire. The event was celebrated across France with grand festivals, fireworks, and church bells ringing in unison. Napoleon had achieved what Josephine could not, a male successor to carry on his legacy. The streets of Paris were flooded with jubilant citizens, and poems were published hailing the dawn of a new imperial age. Marie-Louise had fulfilled her most critical duty. The child was given the title King of Rome, echoing the ancient grandeur Napoleon so admired. At only 19 years old, Marie-Louise was now not only empress, but the mother of a future emperor. Her position at court, once viewed with reserve, solidified overnight. She was praised for her composure during childbirth and honored with titles, portraits, and ceremonies. The French press, orchestrated by the state, painted her as the perfect empress, modest, fertile, and strong. Yet the moment of triumph was also deeply personal. Marie-Louise adored her son. She wrote tenderly of his laughter, his soft features, and the joy he brought into her isolated world. In the nursery, she found peace. For the first time since leaving Vienna, she felt needed not just as a symbol, but as a mother. She spent hours with him each day, personally overseeing his care and refusing to hand over all duties to nurses. Napoleon, too, softened toward her during this period. He praised her publicly, and the imperial family seemed united. He saw in her a partner who had brought him not just legitimacy, but legacy. At court gatherings, their closeness was noted, and Marie-Louise was briefly at the center of adulation. But beneath the joy, shadows lingered. The empire remained at war. Enemies encircled France. And as the child's birth strengthened Napoleon's claim to power, it also placed immense pressure on Marie-Louise to protect the dynasty, regardless of what the future might bring. In this fleeting moment of unity, the Empress had found purpose, but the storm ahead would demand far more than maternal devotion. Just 3 years after the birth of her son, the empire Marie-Louise had helped legitimize began to unravel. Napoleon's disastrous campaign in Russia in 1812 shattered the illusion of his invincibility. Defeats followed swiftly: Leipzig, then the invasion of France itself. Allies turned, armies fell, the empire crumbled. Throughout these upheavals, Marie-Louise remained in Paris, isolated but dutiful. In early 1814, as foreign forces closed in on the capital, Napoleon departed for the front, leaving her as regent in his absence. It was a gesture of trust, yet she had little power. Advisors urged her to flee. The city panicked. By March, Paris had fallen. With her son in tow, Marie-Louise retreated to Blois, hoping to escape the political storm. News soon arrived that Napoleon had abdicated. He was exiled to Elba. France would become a monarchy once more, and Marie-Louise's position was shattered. She wished to follow her husband into exile, but the Austrian court intervened. Her father, Emperor Francis, reclaimed authority over her future. She was ordered to return to Austria with her son, but even that hope vanished. The young king of Rome was taken from her and placed in the custody of Napoleon's enemies. Marie-Louise had entered France as a bride and mother of an empire. She left it alone, stripped of her crown, her husband gone, and her child taken, her future uncertain, her heart heavy. In the reshuffling of European power after Napoleon's fall, the Congress of Vienna granted Marie-Louise a new title and domain: Duchess of Parma, Piacenza, and Guastalla. Though stripped of her role as empress, she was now sovereign of a small yet culturally rich Italian duchy. For the first time in her life, she would rule in her own right, albeit under close Austrian supervision. She arrived in Parma in 1816, met with polite curiosity by her new subjects. Many viewed her as the ex-wife of a fallen tyrant. Others saw her as a foreign ruler imposed by distant diplomats. But Marie-Louise approached her new role with quiet determination. She sought to earn her people's trust, not through grandeur, but through consistency and care. Parma, though peaceful, was no imperial court. Marie-Louise downsized her entourage, adapted to a more modest lifestyle, and began studying local customs. She attended civic events, visited orphanages and hospitals, and funded educational reform. Her efforts to promote the arts led to the restoration of theaters and the patronage of local musicians. Over time, her steady presence began to soften public suspicion. She also made reforms to local governance, introducing laws that improved women's access to education and tightened public health standards. Though her power was limited by Austrian oversight, she navigated bureaucracy with grace and pragmatism. Her calm rule helped Parma avoid the unrest that stirred in other parts of post-Napoleonic Europe. This new chapter offered her a strange kind of freedom. She no longer lived in Napoleon's shadow, nor under her father's thumb. But the personal costs lingered. Her son remained in Vienna out of reach. Letters were censored. Visits were rare. She ruled a duchy, but her heart remained divided, a mother in mourning, a ruler rebuilding. And so, in the quiet streets of Parma, Marie-Louise began to craft a different legacy, one shaped not by war or empire, but by gentleness, persistence, and a longing for connection in a world that had rarely let her choose her own path. While ruling Parma, Marie-Louise's personal life took a dramatic and controversial turn. In 1815, shortly after settling in Italy, she met Count Adam Albert von Nieperg, an Austrian general sent by her father to act as her advisor and protector. What began as a political appointment soon developed into a deeply personal bond. Nieperg was everything Napoleon was not: calm, gentle, and emotionally attentive. Widowed and experienced, he offered companionship to the isolated duchess. Rumors of a romantic relationship spread quickly, though both remained discreet. By 1817, it was clear to those close to Marie-Louise that Nieperg had become not just her confidant, but her partner in every sense. Despite the scandal it risked, Marie-Louise remained unapologetic in private. With Napoleon exiled once more, this time to St. Helena, and her role in France erased, she chose emotional stability over political caution. In a quiet ceremony, she and Nieperg married in secret in the year 1821, shortly after Napoleon's death. This union was never publicly acknowledged by the Austrian court, but it was real and lasting. The couple had 3 children together, whom Marie-Louise raised away from the scrutiny of imperial eyes. For the first time, she had chosen a partner for love, not diplomacy. Yet even in joy, she remained cautious. Her marriage to Nieperg gave her comfort, but it also reminded her how tightly her life remained entangled in secrecy, duty, and fragile independence. The marriage between Marie-Louise and Count Nieperg brought quiet happiness, but it was short-lived. In 1829, Nieperg fell seriously ill and died later that year. His death was a crushing blow to Marie-Louise, who had leaned on his companionship during her most vulnerable years. Her grief was profound and private, and once again she found herself alone. Despite this loss, she remained dutiful in Parma, but her health began to decline. Years of emotional strain, compounded by political tension and personal sorrow, had taken their toll. She developed breathing problems and suffered from chronic fatigue. Still, she refused to relinquish her role, continuing to govern with the same measured consistency that had earned her local respect. At the same time, her hopes of greater political influence were quietly thwarted. Austria kept a close watch on her governance, limiting her ability to act independently. She was seen as a figurehead, tolerated but never fully trusted. Though technically sovereign, she often had to defer to decisions made in Vienna. Worse still, her son, Napoleon Francois, remained out of reach. Now a young man, he lived under strict Austrian control and had grown distant. Marie-Louise's letters to him became less frequent, and visits were rare. The child she once cradled as the King of Rome was slowly fading from her life. Love had given her strength, but illness and disappointment now clouded her days, reminders that even as a duchess, her freedom had always been conditional. In her final years as Duchess of Parma, Marie-Louise's reign remained stable but increasingly subdued. Though her earlier decades in Parma were marked by careful reform and modest success, the later years were overshadowed by personal grief and declining health. Her days became quieter, marked more by reflection than rule. Politically, she maintained order and continuity, avoiding conflict and ensuring that Parma remained neutral amid broader European shifts. Yet the spark that once drove her involvement had dimmed. She no longer engaged actively in policy and left many administrative decisions to her advisors. To the public, she appeared serene and dutiful. Behind palace walls, however, she carried a growing sadness. Her private losses weighed heavily. Her son, Napoleon Francois, had died young in 1832 at just 21 years of age. She was not by his side. The news devastated her. He had been taken from her in childhood, raised under another name, and now even the chance for reconnection was gone. That wound never healed. She spent her time walking in palace gardens, reading and attending religious services. She rarely traveled and seldom appeared in public festivities. Though she was still the ruler of Parma, she seemed more like a ghost of former grandeur, a woman shaped by history, yet slowly erased by time. As the shadows of her past lengthened, Marie-Louise prepared herself quietly for the end, surrounded by loyalty but haunted by what might have been. By the early 1840s, Marie-Louise's health had severely declined. Years of sorrow, restricted freedom, and chronic illness left her frail and withdrawn. Though she continued to hold the title of Duchess, she had long retreated from active leadership. Her final months were spent in quiet seclusion at Parma's ducal palace, attended by a handful of loyal companions. On the 17th of December in the year 1847, Marie-Louise passed away at the age of 56. There were no imperial fanfares or sweeping tributes. Her death was acknowledged with formal respect, but the world she had once stood at the center of had moved on. She was buried not in France or Vienna, but in Parma, the small duchy that had offered her limited peace. Her tomb rests in the Capuchin Church of the Della Staccata, a modest site compared to the grand resting places of her Habsburg ancestors or her former husband, Napoleon. To many in Parma, she had been a quiet, benevolent ruler. To others, she remained a distant foreign presence. For France, she was a forgotten empress. For Austria, a dutiful but politically silent daughter. Her passing marked the end of a life spent between titles, empress, duchess, wife, mother, but rarely on her own terms. There were no grand legacies carved in marble, but in the quiet streets of Parma, her story lingered like a fading echo of a vanished empire. Was Marie-Louise a woman of quiet strength, or merely a pawn moved by empires and men? Historians continue to debate her legacy, caught between admiration for her endurance and critique of her compliance. As the daughter of an emperor, wife of a conqueror, and mother of a stolen heir, she was born into a role she never fully controlled. And yet, within these confines, she left a mark more enduring than many expected. Her marriage to Napoleon is often viewed as a political arrangement rather than a romantic bond, and yet she fulfilled her duties with grace. She gave him an heir, stood by him through war, and governed in his absence. After his downfall, she obeyed her father's will, married for love in secret, and ruled Parma with caution and care. She had no grand ambitions, but she did have quiet resolve. In the shifting landscape of post-Napoleonic Europe, that alone was survival. Some argue she lacked initiative, letting others steer her fate, her father, her husband, her second lover. Others see resilience in her choices, adapting, surviving, and carving out a modest rule amid the ruins of an empire. Marie-Louise may not have shaped the world, but she learned to live within its demands without breaking. She preserved dignity even when she lost power, and maintained grace where many might have faltered. She never sought public glory. She never led armies or clashed with kings, but she also never collapsed into bitterness. In her governance of Parma, her commitment to education, welfare, and the arts spoke of a woman seeking quiet reform over loud revolution. As a mother, she carried the sorrow of separation with silent heartbreak. As a woman, she loved without permission. As a ruler, she endured with steadiness and patience. Even in her final years, far from the thrones of her youth, she remained a figure of silent endurance. Visitors to Parma often remarked on her gentle presence, a duchess who walked her gardens alone, who gave generously, and who rarely spoke of the past. She aged with dignity, accepting the shifting tides of history without complaint. To some, this was passivity. To others, it was wisdom. In a world dominated by dynastic ambitions, perhaps survival itself was a quiet form of power. Her legacy lives not in dramatic victories or grand reforms, but in the subtle ways she endured. A woman of many names, empress, duchess, mother, widow, she never loudly defied the world around her, but she never vanished from it either. And that, perhaps, is its own kind of triumph. What do you think about Maria Carolina of Austria? Was she a fearless queen, a woman who ruled with intellect, passion, and purpose, shaping Naples into a symbol of resilience and reform? Or a forgotten monarch, overshadowed by her sister's tragedy, consumed by political chaos, and remembered only in whispers of revolution and exile? And what about Marie-Louise, Duchess of Parma? Was she a graceful survivor, navigating empires with quiet dignity, embracing love and loss, and leaving behind a legacy of calm leadership? Or merely a passive figure, moved by the will of fathers, husbands, and kings, lost in the margins of greater men's stories? Were these royal women symbols of strength, hidden behind silk and ceremony, or prisoners of a world that allowed them everything except true freedom? Did they carve meaning through quiet endurance, or were they written out of the chapters they helped shape? We would love to hear your thoughts. If these stories touched you, please like, share, and subscribe for more reflections on the lives that shaped history's silent corners. Thank you so much for watching.